This happened just last week, during my final week at home before heading back to college. I've been going back and forth about whether I should even write this down, but I can't get it out of my head. My parents recently moved after I graduated high school. They'd talked for years about downsizing, and once I was leaving for college, they finally did it. Because of the timing, I'd only been to the new house a few times. When they first bought it, they gave me the standard tour, pointing out where everything was and explaining the quirks that come with an older place. One thing they were very clear about was that the house didn't have a basement, just a crawlspace for utilities. They were definitive about it, so I never questioned it. My parents left the night before for a week-long vacation, which meant I had the place to myself. The first strange thing happened on Tuesday night. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard tapping from directly beneath the floor. It was steady, rhythmic, consistent in volume. At first, I told myself it was the heating system or pipes settling. Old houses make noise. But it didn't stop. It kept going. The bedroom I was in is on the first floor, so the sound was clearly coming from underground. I got up and walked around, trying to locate the source, but it seemed to be everywhere beneath me. That's when it started to bother me. According to my parents, there was nothing down there except a crawlspace. No livable area. No basement. Eventually the tapping stopped, and I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been nothing. Probably an animal in the crawlspace. But the following night, at almost the exact same time, the tapping started again, only louder. I ignored it and forced myself to sleep, but I was much more uneasy. On the third night, things escalated. It wasn't just tapping anymore. There were dragging sounds. Scraping. Like claws being raked across wood. Occasionally something heavy. Shifting or being pulled. I tried to rationalize it. Animals. Old pipes. Wood expanding. But the sounds were too deliberate. Too purposeful. I started wondering if my parents were wrong. Maybe there was some kind of hidden access or small basement space they didn't know about. The next morning, I called them. My dad immediately suggested checking the crawlspace for animals. I really didn't want to, but I did. The entrance was under the porch. I had to crouch down in the dirt and open it up. I braced myself for something. There was nothing. No animals. No signs of entry. My dad seemed satisfied. I wasn't. Later that day, I walked around the outside of the house looking for other possible openings. That's when I noticed a pile of old construction materials stacked against one wall: lumber, tarps, concrete blocks. I'd seen them before but never paid attention. This time, I started moving things aside. Behind them was a storm door. It had been partially painted over and clearly hadn't been used in a long time. But it was real. I pulled it open. Concrete steps led down into a basement. I just stood there. My parents had insisted there wasn't one. I didn't want to go down. But I did. It didn't take long to realize someone had been living down there. There were empty food containers scattered across the floor. Blankets. Trash. But that wasn't the worst part. One of the wooden support pillars had tally marks scratched into it. Dozens of them. On another beam were drawings carved deep into the wood, twisted figures of people and animals, distorted in ways I don't even want to describe. It didn't feel like the work of someone simply down on their luck. It felt wrong. I went back upstairs immediately and called my parents. They were shocked. They said they had no idea the basement existed. My dad kept asking if I was sure no one was down there. I told him I was sure. They cut their vacation short. After the call, I went to the store and bought a heavy-duty padlock. I secure the storm door from the outside. That night, I was jolted awake by violent banging. Metal rattling. Someone was outside trying to open the basement door. The banging was aggressive, frantic. Like whoever it was had just discovered it was locked. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Then it stopped. I crept to the window and looked out just in time to see a figure sprint across the backyard and disappear into the darkness. I couldn't make out any features. Just movement. The police searched the house, including the basement. They found nothing. They said they'd increase patrols. My parents came home the next day and insisted everything would be fine. But I left for college the following morning, and I've felt sick about it ever since. Someone had been living in that basement. Someone who made those markings. And someone who came back the moment they realized they were locked out. It's only been a few days, and nothing else has happened, at least nothing my parents have told me about. But I can't stop thinking about those tallies carved into the wood. Counting something. Waiting for something. And I can't shake the feeling that locking that door didn't end it. It just made them angry. I grew up in a small town just a few miles from the Montana-Idaho border, on the Montana side. Nothing much ever happens out there, and honestly that's part of the reason I never left. This happened a long time ago, back before everyone had smartphones and the internet in their pockets. Not that my area has changed much since then anyway. Life out there still moves slowly. It was the very end of August, one of those last summer mornings where you can already feel fall creeping in. I was driving my usual route to work, a 2-lane highway cutting through farmland and low rolling hills. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed a car pulled off on the shoulder. It was a light blue sedan, an older model. It looked like it had been sitting there for a while. No hazard lights, no one standing outside, just the car angled slightly toward the ditch. Now I'm not stupid, but I'm the type of person who helps someone in need. That's how I was raised. As I drove past, I slowed down a little to get a better look. The car wasn't running and I couldn't see anyone inside, not in the driver's seat, not in the passenger seat, not even in the back. It was strange, especially that early in the morning, but not alarming. Out there, people break down all the time and walk to the nearest farmhouse for help. So I kept driving. I had work to get to, and it didn't seem urgent. By the time my shift ended, I had pretty much forgotten about it. But on my drive home that evening, I saw the car again. Same exact spot. This time, though, the driver's door was wide open. I knew it hadn't been open that morning. I slowed down again, craning my neck to look as I passed. Still no one around. No one walking nearby, no signs of anyone at all. Just the car sitting there with the door hanging open like someone had gotten out in a hurry and never came back. That was enough to bother me. Once I got back into an area with cell service, I pulled over and called the non-emergency police line. I told the operator where the car was and what I had noticed. She thanked me and said someone would check it out. The next morning on my way to work, the car was gone. I figured that was the end of it. About a week later, while eating breakfast, I saw something on the local news that caught my attention. The police were investigating a missing person case. They said a vehicle had been found abandoned along a rural stretch of highway outside town. My stomach dropped immediately. The details matched exactly what I had seen. They didn't release the man's name, but they said the car belonged to someone from out of town who never showed up to where he was supposed to be. According to authorities, there were no signs of foul play and no witnesses. That didn't sit right with me. I kept thinking about the car and that open door. I might have been the first person, maybe even the only person, who reported it. The whole thing stuck with me. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I called my brother. I'll call him Benjamin. He's a firefighter in a nearby town. Around here, departments and police often share information, so I figured he might know something. He said their station had received a memo about the abandoned vehicle and the missing person. But he didn't know many details. I asked if the police were planning a search. He said they probably would eventually. For some reason, I felt invested in the situation. I suggested we help out and maybe bring a few guys from his station. At first he thought it was a strange idea, but eventually he agreed. Within a few days, with permission from the sheriff's office, a small search was organized. Nothing huge, just a few officers, some off-duty firefighters, and me. We searched a wooded area not far from the highway, along with some old irrigation ditches. From the road, the terrain didn't look like much, but once you were walking through it, you realized how easy it would be for someone to disappear. We split into pairs. I teamed up with my brother. About an hour into the search, someone radioed in. They'd spotted something through the brush. We all headed toward their location. It turned out to be an old maintenance shack, half sunken into the ground and covered in overgrowth. From the highway, you'd never know it was there. The door was slightly open, and the lock had clearly been broken. Inside it smelled damp and stale. At first it looked abandoned, but once our eyes adjusted, we started noticing signs someone had been there recently. There were empty water bottles and food wrappers scattered around. One of the firefighters pointed to the back wall. There was a small, clean hole in one of the wooden boards just above floor level. The edges were sharp and splintered. It looked exactly like a bullet hole. We searched the entire shack and the surrounding area. No shell casing. No bullet fragment. No blood. Just that single hole in the wall. The officers radioed the discovery to dispatch, and the mood changed immediately. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. The lead officer gathered everyone together and told us they'd handle things from there. Then he asked me specifically to leave since I was the only civilian there. I didn't like it, but I didn't have much choice. Later that evening, I called my brother. He told me the firefighters had also been asked to leave shortly after I did. The police took over completely. Over the next few weeks, I kept waiting for updates. Benjamin asked around his contacts, but nobody seemed to know anything. The news never followed up on the story. It was like the whole thing disappeared. Eventually, I decided to go back and try to find the shack myself. I drove to the same stretch of highway where the search had started and spent hours walking the area where I was sure the shack had been. I followed the irrigation ditches exactly as I remembered them. But the shack was gone. Completely gone. No debris. No foundation. Nothing. I searched different sections of the area, convinced I had to be close. Still nothing. Standing there alone in that quiet, overgrown land, I started questioning my own memory. Maybe I had the location wrong. But even if I did, that shack should have been somewhere nearby. The only other explanation was that the county had removed it. But that seemed like a strange response to a simple missing person case. Eventually, I gave up and went home. To this day, I don't know what really happened out there. Every year when August rolls around and the air starts feeling like summer is ending, I think about that abandoned car, and that bullet hole in the wall of a shack that might not even exist anymore. This happened last August, and it completely changed the way I feel about solo camping. When I was a kid, my dad had this tradition. Every year near the end of summer, sometime around mid-August, he would take me and my brother camping. It wasn't anything fancy, just a few days out in the wilderness before school started again. I'm in my late 20s now. I have a steady girlfriend and a normal adult life, but that end-of-summer camping tradition is something I've tried to keep going. Sometimes my dad and brother join me, but most of the time I go alone. My girlfriend absolutely hates camping, and I don't want to drag her somewhere she'd be miserable the whole time, so I've gotten used to doing these trips solo. For this particular trip, I found what looked like the perfect spot on Google Maps. It was a small clearing deep in the woods, far away from any official campsites or hiking trails. I liked the idea of being truly alone out there. No RVs. No families with screaming kids. Just quiet. I downloaded the map so I could still access it without service, packed my gear, and hiked in. The hike took about 2 hours. I'm in decent shape, but I was carrying all my supplies, so I took my time. Eventually I reached the clearing. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, a flat patch of ground surrounded by tall pine trees, with just enough open sky to see the stars. That first night was perfect. I made a small fire, cooked some freeze-dried pasta that honestly wasn't that bad, and spent some time stargazing. It was quiet, peaceful, and exactly why I loved these trips. The next morning I decided to hike to a river I had spotted on my map. I thought it would be fun to try catching a fish for dinner instead of eating the packaged food I brought. I ended up spending most of the day there. I'm not much of a fisherman, but I got lucky and caught a decent-sized brook trout. I tossed it in my small cooler and started heading back to camp. I was feeling pretty good about myself. The problem was I completely misjudged how long the hike back would take. The sun started setting faster than I expected. Within maybe 20 minutes, it went from that warm golden evening light to near darkness. I had a headlamp, but the terrain was unfamiliar, so I was moving pretty slowly. That's when I noticed a faint light in the distance. It was swaying back and forth, like someone walking with a lantern or flashlight. At first I felt relieved. Maybe another camper was nearby and we could help each other find our way back. As I watched, the light got closer. Whoever was holding it was walking toward me. Not wanting to scare them, I called out a friendly hello and asked if they were camping too. The light stopped moving instantly. It just hung there in the darkness. A few seconds passed. Then the light shut off completely. Now the forest was pitch black again. I stared at the spot where it had been. Then suddenly I heard violent crashing through the underbrush off to my left. It sounded like someone running full speed through the forest, but not toward me and not away from me. Just running sideways through the woods. My heart started racing. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had scared them by calling out. Maybe they panicked. But something about it felt wrong. Most people would at least say something back. I hurried the rest of the way back to my campsite. I was so unsettled that I didn't even cook the fish. I just sat in my tent, ate some of my packed food, and tried reading before going to sleep early. I'm usually a heavy sleeper when I'm camping. After hiking all day, I'm normally exhausted. So when I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, I knew something was wrong. I listened for a few minutes. Everything sounded normal. Just wind in the trees and the usual forest noises. Before trying to sleep again, I realized I needed to step outside. I unzipped my tent and slowly poked my head out. The moon was bright enough that I could see most of the clearing. And that's when I froze. Someone was standing there. About 15 feet from my tent. I couldn't see any details, just the silhouette of a person standing perfectly still in the clearing. They were facing my tent. Just standing there, watching. My brain started racing, but my body wouldn't move. Whoever it was had probably heard me unzip the tent. They knew I was there. The thought crossed my mind that I might be seconds away from being attacked. That snapped me out of my paralysis. I grabbed the switchblade I kept by the tent entrance and shouted, asking who was there. The second I spoke, the figure sprinted directly toward my tent. No hesitation. Just instantly running at me. And they were screaming. Not yelling. Screaming in this high, twisted sound that didn't even feel human. Before I could react, the man crashed into me. We both hit the ground and started wrestling. He wasn't punching me, he was clawing at my face like an animal, trying to rip at my skin. I managed to shove the knife between us and slash toward his hand before dropping it during the struggle. Even though the cut wasn't clean, it was enough. The man let out this horrible shriek and jumped off me. Then he ran into the forest, crashing through the trees while making this disturbing mix of screaming and laughing. I sat there shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. My face burned from the scratches. There was blood everywhere, and I couldn't tell if it was mine or his. I thought about trying to hike back to my car immediately, but moving through the forest in complete darkness seemed like an even worse idea. So I stayed in my tent. The rest of the night I sat there with the switchblade in my hand, listening to every sound and expecting him to come back. It was the longest night of my life. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my gear as quietly as possible and hiked back to my car much faster than I had on the way in. The moment I reached the car, I drove away without looking back. I thought about calling the police. But what would I even say? That I got attacked while camping illegally in the middle of nowhere? They probably would have told me it was my own fault. So I didn't report it. The whole drive home, I kept thinking about how close things came to ending badly. If I hadn't had that knife. If he hadn't run when I cut him. Things could have gone very differently. But the thing that still bothers me the most isn't the attack. It's the fact that he was even out there. He clearly wasn't camping. And he somehow tracked me down in complete darkness. That scream he made still echoes in my head sometimes. It was human. But twisted into something that sounded wrong. I haven't gone solo camping since that night. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever will again.